Hello and welcome to the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, where we are now in our third season of helping everyday runners fuel better, run smarter, and recover faster so you can reach your full performance potential. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchuk, dietitian, running coach, twin mom, and fellow runner too. As the owner of Stephanie Natchuk Performance Nutrition, I've spent over a decade helping runners learn to fuel their bodies better, unlock their best running performances, and establish healthier relationships with food and exercise. This podcast is all about helping you become the very best runner you can be by teaching you the running-specific nutrition, training, and recovery strategies that you need to reach all your wildest health, fitness, and running goals. If you're ready to reconnect with your love of running, join me each week as I share my best advice, interview guest experts, and talk to everyday runners who are conquering their goals by tapping into the power of performance nutrition, with a side of some myth busting too. And if you're looking for even more tips, resources, and strategies for runners, you can find me on Instagram at Steph the Runner's Dietitian or by visiting www.stephanienatchuk.com. All right, let's dive into today's episode. Start today's episode, I just want to really quickly invite you to download my free fueling guide and strength training guides for runners. Currently available as a handy little bundle for you all in one at the link in the show notes. So just to give you more information, in this free fueling guide, you're going to find my top fueling tips for runners. As well, in there, I've put together some meal ideas and even a couple of recipes for your pre and post run fuel. We've also got some suggestions for what to fuel with during your run to make sure that you just have the best overall performance possible. If you've really been struggling to understand what to eat, when, where to start when it comes to supporting your running with better nutrition, this guide is here to help you kickstart your running journey. The other guide that I mentioned is my strength training guide for runners. We know that runners are notoriously bad at consistently getting their strength training in. So this guide includes both a PDF resource, it's got some tips, some guidelines, as well as a link to my series on YouTube where I walk you through all the exercises in this program, giving you some suggestions on proper form, how to modify if needed, how to progress things if needed. This is a really great beginner's guide to strength training for runners who want an effective but efficient full body workout that is going to support the key muscles and movements you need to run stronger and help stay injury free. So once again, both of these guides are available as a handy little bundle. So you just click on the link in the show notes, enter your email address once, and both of the free guides are going to get sent to your inbox right away. I really hope that you find these guides helpful and that they support you and your running goals in the most effective way possible. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, where I am very excited to be having a conversation with you all about eating as a plant-based runner, nutrition considerations, things to think about as a plant-based runner. If you're considering becoming a plant-based runner, how do we sort of navigate that, and what are the pros and also maybe some cons of being a more plant-based eater as a runner? So yeah, let's go ahead and dive into it. So the term plant-based, like to be a plant-based eater, has very, very different definitions depending on who you talk to. It's one of those things that does not have a formal definition, something that we can sort of rely upon and all agree upon. And that is always a huge challenge in the nutrition and diet space, and like in the fitness space as well. I think in a lot of places, obviously, when we don't all have an agreed upon definition of something, then we can be talking and using the same terminology, but disagreeing because we don't have the same definition of certain terms. So I just want to, so we're all on the same page for the purpose of this episode and how I work with clients as a dietitian who works with runners and other athletes. When I talk about being a plant-based eater, that means that our diet is mostly plants, right? The diet that I'm describing has, predominantly plant foods, as opposed to animal foods, but does not need to be exclusively plant foods because that is what being vegan is, right? Vegan is the exclusion of all animal products and oftentimes, animal byproducts, and maybe even that continues into different other, items, clothing, etc., that you might purchase. But a vegan eating pattern, a vegan eating style, is the exclusion of all animal foods. So when you think about being a plant-based eater, this may be synonymous with you for being vegan, or it may be that you're just slightly less, I'll say, strict with your vegan diet and include some animal foods, maybe a select small handful of animal foods on a regular basis, or maybe you just keep things somewhat flexible, due to other family members' preferences or when you're socializing, etc. It may be, feel okay for you to not be exclusively very strictly vegan. So we sort of have plant-based, which, and again, we can have sort of varying degrees of the exact amount or types of animal foods that a person might include when they're still, in my opinion, considered plant-based. If you disagree with that, that's completely fine. If to you plant-based means vegan, then that's completely okay. Just understanding that plant-based does not have like a universal agreed upon definition with everybody. But if that's what it means for you, then that's totally fine. But just so that you know, when I am using the term plant-based, I don't mean that this needs to be at the expense and completely exclude all animal foods. When I say vegan and, someone who eats a vegan diet as a runner, that's going to be a little bit different because I'm assuming that this person does not have any meat, dairy, eggs, etc. in their diet. And then we've seen a lot of people coming, into this space and using the term flexitarian. And, to me, kind of being plant-based, not vegan, but plant-based or flexitarian, like those can be a little bit interchangeable, and they may be for you with your personal definition, or they may not, and that's totally fine. But to use those terms sort of synonymously in the sense that, like, yes, the diet is mostly plant-based, but we do have it, some flexibility at times, maybe with specific foods or specific situations that may be social situations or otherwise that make it simpler, for whatever reason it's acceptable for us to include non-plant foods in our diet some of the time. And again, where you fall on that spectrum is completely okay. I, as a dietitian, as a practitioner, somebody who works with nutrition, works on nutrition with runners, I am open to and accepting of all dietary patterns. I personally am very dietarily agnostic, meaning that I do not believe that there is one size fits all here. One approach, one eating pattern, one eating style that is appropriate or works for every person at all stages of life. That's another thing that I think about a lot when I see people arguing, the merits of this diet or that diet or whatever. It's like, you might have two completely different people with two completely different needs, nutritionally speaking, that makes it much more acceptable or appropriate, easier, whatever it might be, for these people to follow different dietary patterns. There is no one diet that is suitable or appropriate or perfect for all of us, from birth until we die. Like, that just doesn't exist. And so it's okay too if over the course of your life, your dietary habits and patterns change depending on, what stage of life you're in. For example, if you go from, say, being a very, active runner who is maybe single, has a partner, you want to eat plant-based, that's great. But then maybe you get pregnant, and during your pregnancy, you include some more different animal foods because it's just, you maybe crave them or you have a need for those nutrients and it's an easy way for you to get those nutrients and etc. And then after pregnancy, you're eating a little bit differently because now you're feeding children and they have very different nutrient needs compared to adults, etc. So all that to say, a big reason why I'm not super pro labeling ourselves with certain diets is I think that it's okay to keep things flexible. It's okay for things to change throughout your life. It's okay to not totally tie yourself to one specific type of or way of eating, just in case at some point in time that shifts for you and that changes for you. It may not, and that's of course totally fine as well. And if you want to, have a specific way that you sort of label your eating style, and that does, feel really good in terms of part of your identity, then I'm not, obviously I think that that's great and I'm not going to argue with it. But if you feel like you need to find a food identity and you're feeling really pressured to like hop on a certain dietary pattern and sort of label yourself as something, even though you don't necessarily know what that might be yet, or aren't super committed to a certain idea, just know that you don't have to. Like, it's okay to also not have a label and just follow, maybe a more flexitarian style of eating. So anyway, a little bit of a longer intro just to kind of set the stage. Because again, I just think it's super important that when we're talking about these things, we are using, clear definitions. We understand where each other is coming from. It makes it so much easier to not get in fights on the internet, and not end up arguing with people over maybe silly semantics when we're just really upfront about what it is that we're even talking about. So the motivation to become a more plant-based or vegan athlete can come from a lot of different places. And, really today, for the purpose of today's episode, we are going to be focusing solely on nutrition, and health, and sort of those aspects of eating, right? Fueling, optimal fueling, etc., as opposed to getting into things about ethics of food choices or any environmental impacts of our food choices, mostly because obviously I am not here to talk to anybody about their personal ethics or comfort levels with eating or not eating certain things. And from an environmental perspective, I am not an expert in that in any which way. I am a dietitian. My area of expertise is nutrition and health and looking at it from that lens. Yes, all of these things are interconnected and they're all an important part of what goes towards us making those day-to-day food choices, as well as just like personal taste preference, budget, convenience. Like, there's lots of other factors that go into it. But those conversations around like ethics and environment considerations, et cetera, I just, are just not my area of expertise, or really, feel like they're in my wheelhouse. So we are for today going to focus on the nutrition and sort of the health focused aspects of being a plant-based eater or a vegan eater as a runner, and talk about some of the ins and outs, some things that I want you to be thinking about, things to pay attention to, some of the most common hurdles or sort of challenges that I see my plant-based runners that I coach kind of fall into, how we can get around it, and really just optimize your nutrition and your performance as a plant-based or vegan eater. So, what are some of the benefits of eating a more plant-based diet as a runner? And again, this does not need to be a 100% vegan diet, but it can be. But certainly if, one of your goals for this year, or for any point in time, if one of your goals is to eat more plant-based and you want to shift toward more plant-based eating, what are some of the pros of that? Like, what are some of the benefits of doing that? And, the big one for you, the runner, is that plant-based diets, tend to be higher in carbohydrates, which is fantastic because we're always trying to get our runners to get in more fuel. So if you are training for a marathon and you have a choice, let's say you have like this, dichotomous choose diet A or choose diet B. Diet A is a plant-based diet and diet B is a, low carb, more, meat-based diet. I mean, for a marathon runner, we're going with the plant-based diet every single time because that's going to be great running fuel for you. Most of the foods that you're going to be eating on a plant-based diet are going to be great sources of carbohydrates, right? That's going to be your fruits, starchy veggies, whole grains, as well as things like a lot of your plant protein sources also come along with, carbohydrates, very high fiber. So you're going to be getting a lot of great quality running fuel if you're eating more of a plant-based type of diet. If your plant-based diet is like, I'm not having carbs, I'm not having grains, I'm not having fruit, like I'm just having salads, well, we might run into some issues, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But If we're looking at like a varied, lots of variety, lots of different food groups, trying to meet all of our nutrient targets, then we're going to be getting in some really great sources of carbohydrates and running fuel. Plant-based diets also naturally tend to include more fruits and vegetables than what you would find in more animal food or more kind of meat based or sort of meat heavy diets, which of course makes perfect sense. We definitely need to eat something if we're going to be plant based. And so fruits and veggies are going to be a real cornerstone. And again, just as I sort of mentioned before, that like, you know, I'm very sort of agnostic when it comes to the dietary space. And I don't think there's a one size fits all approach here. I do truly believe that most people benefit from having most of their diet be plant foods. Like if we're looking at, your plate, 100% of the food you eat on your plate, um, you know, we want usually, at least 2/3, if not 3/4, or 100% is fine. But like, typically I want at least 2/3 of a person's plate to be plant foods, even if they are including meat and dairy as protein sources, etc. The vast majority of that plate space at all of our meals should be plants. And, this comes down to making sure that we are getting in enough fruits and veggies, as well as our whole grains and starchy vegetables, because those are where we get fiber from. And fiber is so, so important for good health, long-term health, disease prevention. We get tons of nutrients along with high fiber foods. So I'm a huge fan of course, eating more plants. And there's a lot of reasons for doing so. The other thing, one of the other benefits of shifting towards kind of more of a plant-based eating style is that you are going to get in more of these plant protein sources, hopefully. And I will talk about that too. Getting in more plant protein sources, which would be like our soy foods, whether that's tofu, edamame, other forms of fermented soy products. We have beans, lentils, chickpeas. There's, this sort of category or world of plant protein sources, which are wonderful to add to our diet. They're very nutrient dense and are a great source of fiber, as well as being good sources of, other vitamins and minerals. So there's a lot of benefits and a lot of reasons why I would recommend or encourage pretty much any runner to be emphasizing and optimizing plant foods in their diet. But again, I don't believe that it necessarily needs to be at the 100% expensive animal foods. Animal foods just are going to be more like 25 to 30% of our like plate space by proportion, like by volume. Some of the challenges of eating plant-based as a runner, some of the things that you might run into, especially if you're a high volume runner, will be getting in enough calories. So plant foods are high in fiber, which is wonderful. You will never hear me say a bad word about getting enough fiber, except for the fact that fiber is very filling, right? Fiber fills us up and it keeps us full for a long time after we eat. So high fiber foods can sometimes give us a lot of volume, like a big meal size, but not always a lot of calories. And like I mentioned, having just a big salad, a big green salad, you've got lots of leafy greens, you've got veggies, maybe you've got like cucumber and bell peppers and carrots and all these beautiful things in the salad, some dressing. You're going to be like pretty full right after you eat this like big salad, but the actual calories that you got in were pretty low. Like that might only be a couple hundred calories. Like it might only be like 200 or 300 calories, and most of that is going to come from the salad dressing. And so if you are not thinking about meeting your energy needs and really planning and creating your dietary strategy or making sure you're getting in enough calories, then you may struggle with something called low energy availability. Now, if you've been listening to the show here for a while, then low energy availability is probably something that you've heard me talk about before. And the reason why a plant-based athlete may sometimes be at higher risk here is again, just because those high fiber foods, the fruits and veggies, can be very high in fiber, very filling, lots of volume, but not actually give us that many calories. Especially if our calories are high, we need to be eating often. It can be challenging to do that. There also is, of course, technically such thing as getting in too much fiber. I mean, most people aren't at risk, but, athletes who are eating lots and lots and lots of fruits and veggies as like a primary source of calories, And sometimes this can come from concerns around not wanting to have grains or starches. Like, you would feel maybe okay having a big salad, but you would not feel okay having a potato because you've been told potatoes are too high in carbs, too starchy, like not good for you, right? But unfortunately, having, trying to get all of your energy, all of your nutrients, everything from just those low carb veggies, it can be, to the point where you're maybe getting like, if a person's general needs for fiber, women need about 25 grams a day, men need about 38 grams per day as a minimum. There's no kind of established upper limit for fiber, but I have seen athletes who are getting like 85 to 100 grams a day because they're just eating so many fruits and veggies. And there can be a point where, digestively speaking, that may be giving you some issues. We may be running into problems of low energy availability, but specifically low carbohydrate availability. Like, we're taking in so many of these high fiber plant foods, we're not getting in enough like starches. Like, we're not getting in enough, carbohydrate calories that our body can use. Because fiber does fall under the category of a carbohydrate. It is a carbohydrate. However, we actually don't get much energy from fiber. We don't really break down fiber to give us calories. So it's beneficial and it's valuable for a lot of reasons: gut microbiome, healthy digestion, optimal bowel movements, etc. But it's not a source of like fuel for us. So I have seen, on a couple of occasions where runners are eating tremendously high fiber diets. We need to swap out some of those foods for more like calorie dense foods, more grains, potatoes, breads, pastas, rice, sweet potatoes, muffins, stuff like that. That's going to give us that source of energy and improve our carbohydrate availability. Not just looking at like the total calories that we're taking in. Hope that makes sense. So calories, what that can be one of the challenges is making sure that we're getting in enough calories, especially the right kind of calories in the sense of protein. And for an athlete, your protein needs are higher than non-athletes. And if you're an athlete trying to change or optimize your body composition, then your protein needs can be even higher. Or if you're a high volume athlete, you're doing a lot of strength training, etc., we're talking about needing at least 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight, up to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight. So somewhere between 1.5 and 2 grams per kilo. And so if you've got these really high protein needs, but we're just getting those proteins from plant sources, sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge, right? Either volume of like the amount of protein foods that you need to eat, just we're talking like cups and cups and cups of beans a day, might not be doable for you. The other thing that I can see sometimes happen is that, again, we're having to eat so much in terms of volume, that's so much fiber that's crowding out our ability to eat other foods. Like, if we need to be eating, and I'm just, just off the top of my head, kind of throwing examples out there, like if you say need to be eating like 2 or 3 cups of beans at a meal to try and get in your protein goal for that meal. Well, you might not have space in your stomach to also have maybe the like 1 or 2 cups of rice that I also would want you to be getting in at that meal to make sure that we're hitting your carbohydrate goal. So if your protein needs are higher, and they are as an athlete, then you may find that you need to use some like protein powders, supplemental protein sources in order to meet your goal, because these plant protein foods, part of the beauty of them, why they're so wonderful, is because they're so nutrient dense and they're a good source of fiber and they're really high volume and they're filling. But the problem is that they're really high volume and they're filling. So there's kind of a balance there that we need to look at. And, just in complete transparency, I do find that a lot of my plant-based athletes, I do usually end up recommending a protein powder just to make sure that we're getting in that minimum of 1.5 grams per kilo. There very well might be other nutrition professionals in this space who, feel differently and don't find that protein powders are really something that they recommend to their athletes. But we're always looking at convenience, variety, acceptability, stuff like that. So it's just one consideration. And the other reason that this might be a consideration is because some of the other protein sources that we utilize with plant-based eaters is going to be protein sources that do have a lot of fat calories that come along with them. This is going to be mostly in our category of nuts and seeds. And so nuts and seeds are, very convenient sources of a lot of nutrients, right? They've got lots of unsaturated fats, which is great. They are a source of fiber. They do have some protein in them. So nuts and seeds can be fabulous, and I think a great addition to any runner's diet. But if we are relying very, very heavily on nuts and seeds as like a protein source, now we're getting in potentially a very high amount of fat calories, which can lead us to having sort of too many calories as a whole, or pushing our macronutrient balance out of whack. And I've seen this a lot too with athletes where their calories don't look too bad. Like if we look at what they're eating, do that assessment, their calories look okay, but their carbohydrate calories are very low and their fat calories are very high. So they're just not fueling ideally for the types of workouts they're doing as a runner, right? They're not getting in the carbohydrate protein fat ratio that's really ideal for like fueling the types of workouts that they're doing. So they can find that they're, low energy. Like again, this carbohydrate availability is a big part of the story. They don't have a lot of energy for good quality workouts. Their recovery is lacking, very sore, not getting good results from their training, but on paper seem to be eating a good amount of calories. We add it up and it's like, yeah, okay, this looks fine, but it's that balance of macronutrients that might be a little bit out of sync. And so sometimes we need to shift that reliance away from those higher fat plant protein foods. We still include them, just maybe not quite to the degree that we were, in order to get more carbohydrate sources and then more of like the beans, lentils, chickpeas, soy foods in order to get in the higher protein without quite as many fat calories. These are all things that, if you're listening to this episode and you're either like, oh, yeah, okay, like this is making a lot of sense, like I'm understanding where you're coming from. Or if you're listening to this episode and your head is literally spinning right now, like if all these things I'm saying, you're like, wait, I'm supposed to do what? Like, holy crap, Steph, I need to write this down. Take some notes, that's fine. But this is what I help runners do. Like as a dietitian who works with runners to optimize their diet, whether it's vegan or not, right? Any and all spectrums of the plant-based diet that I talked about. This is what I help runners do, right? We look at what you're eating, we assess what you're taking in day to day, look at the numbers. How are you doing, energy in based on your training volume? What's your macronutrient distribution? How many calories from carbs, fat, and protein are you getting? And then look at how we can optimize. Do we need to shift your targets? What foods do we want to increase in your diet? What foods should we decrease in your diet? What is your optimal meal timing? Like before you train, after you train, how much of what do you need? And really getting into all of these specifics that are personalized and specific to you. So here today, I'm giving just kind of some general information and just sort of what I see when I'm working with people. But of course, if you're looking for some help with what you need specifically, then that is exactly why you would work with a sport dietitian. So I talked about like protein, and if your protein needs are higher, which they probably are as an athlete, you may find that you need a protein supplement to meet your goal. This is especially true because protein is in grams per kilo. If you are a higher weight athlete, therefore your needs are higher. If you're someone who's, maybe 45, 50 kilos, if you're quite petite, then it may not be a stretch for you to get in the protein that you need just from your kind of whole food sources. So it just depends. Now, our sort of best, I'll say, quote unquote, protein sources, I really encourage people to dig into utilizing protein sources like beans, lentils, chickpeas, and soy foods, because they do give us so much protein, as well as lots of fiber, lots of nutrients, etc. Nuts and seeds are fantastic as well for lots of reasons, but they do tend to have like as much, if not more, fat calories compared to protein calories. So it's just a little consideration in terms of energy balance and macronutrient distribution. Now, on that note, I talk to a lot of people in my line of work who want to be more plant-based for whatever reason. Maybe it's health related. Maybe they're getting pressure from some other source. They're seeing a lot of people eating more plant-based, like they're feeling that pull and that draw towards being more plant-based. But when I mention these plant proteins, they're like, oh, I don't like those. I don't eat those. No, not going to happen. I hate beans. I hate lentils, tofu, right? And so That is an important thing to think about. And, part of why I just think that we can all sort of exist on this spectrum of eating. I think you can learn to like new foods and you can learn to cook with different things. You can learn to enjoy foods that maybe you didn't before, just with exposure and experience, etc. So if you don't like those foods now, I wouldn't want to close that door and say, okay, well, you're never going to like them, never try them ever again, just give up. But being 100% vegan may not work for you in the long run, may not be a solution for you in the long run, nutritionally speaking, if there's this huge category of really key foods that you don't want to include in your diet or can't include in your diet for whatever reason. So in that case, choosing your, animal-based protein sources along with lots of fruits, veggies, whole grains, nuts and seeds, etc., lots of other plant foods might be that ideal balance for you. And again, that's totally okay. I do encourage everyone, whether you want to go more plant-based or not, to utilize plant proteins more in your diet. There's so many reasons to do that. And I think it's great to have the variety and the nutrients and everything like that go along with it. So I think everyone benefits from utilizing plant proteins, but just know that if it's not something that you particularly enjoy, your family doesn't enjoy, you know, you don't have to eat all of those things, especially on a daily basis in order to still get all of your nutrient needs met. The other consideration, the other challenge that I think is changing, I think this one may not be isn't the challenge that it used to be, but depending on the situation or maybe where you live, what's available, is the idea of convenience, right? We as runners, we're busy, right? Athletes, we're busy. We have a lot on the go. And so we don't always have a tremendous amount of time to plan, grocery shop, prepare and eat all of our meals in a day. And so it used to be that convenience foods, like plant-based, good quality plant-based convenience meals were very difficult to find. So sometimes we needed to be a little bit more flexible with our food choices when maybe traveling or in social situations or just for convenience sake, etc. Because getting something that wasn't just a green salad when you were in certain places was hard. And so if we're trying to get certain nutrient targets met, then maybe we needed to be a little bit more flexible with things on the go. I think everybody would agree that that has changed a lot. There are more and more plant-based options and more good plant-based options. Like it's not just a matter of like, okay, here's our, you know, garden salad or, here's a granola bar, something like that. Like that's going to be your only choice, but actually seeing some like restaurants and food company stuff are making a lot of different options. So convenience may be a factor in all of this, but it may not be. I think in most situations, it's probably not a huge concern anymore. There might be some social situations on occasion that the plant-based meal that you're served or kind of offered is not ideal, but those are usually, kind of one-offs, not your daily typical diet that you might be having. I also do think though that, and this is true, honestly, plant-based diet or not, there is a component of, wanting you, the runner, to have some confidence, some skills, some literacy in the kitchen in order to make meals that you really enjoy. Part of the reason that people don't enjoy and want to eat more plant proteins, I believe, is because they just don't know what to do with them, right? Maybe you're someone who enjoys just kind of eating plain black beans out of the can, like my babies do. They really like black beans, and I find it, it's kind of fascinating. They would just eat them as is out of the can. But like for most of us, we want our food to have a little bit more flavor, a little bit more pizzazz than just opening a can of beans and eating it. And so I think that part of the resistance or part of the challenge can be just not really having like the cooking skills or really understanding how to use these foods. So sometimes a little bit of, trying some new recipes, maybe taking a class, seeing recipes and cooking videos and stuff online, really getting yourself accustomed and taking advantage of those resources can go a long way towards improving, how you feel and your relationship with some of those plant protein options. So that's kind of the ins and outs. There's a ton of pros. There can be some cons in some situations to being on a plant-based diet. The other kind of last one that I just want to touch on is, the motivation for being vegan. sometimes can come from a place of having a unhealthy relationship with food. And, everyone, like I said, has their own internal motivation for wanting to be more plant-based. And all of those are valid motivations and valid reasons. But if it's coming for you from a place of a desire to lose weight, especially if you already are at a lower weight, if you already are getting into disordered eating or eating disorder territory, and this is a way for you to further restrict your diet, if this is a way for you to remove more foods and to have others around you not question or not be able to disagree or argue with your dietary choices. Sometimes these types of dietary patterns can just sort of mask or veil somebody who is really struggling in their relationship with food, whether it's disordered eating patterns or an eating disorder that they might be suffering from, because we can kind of put that label on of, being vegan. And then there's this whole category of animal foods that we can't eat. So it allows us to easily restrict more things, filling up on a lot of low calorie but high fiber plant foods, really big salads, etc. Lots of volume, not a lot of calories. You can see how it might become a little bit of a slippery slope for some people. And so if that is you, and this is kind of resonating with you, then I just want you to know that, I understand. And, I see where this is coming from, but I do want you to get help and talk to someone about what you're struggling with and what you're going through with your nutrition and some of the challenges that you're having. Because we can, if you want to be plant-based or you want to be vegan, that is an option. We could do that. Except we have to make sure that we're hitting our nutrient goals. We have to make sure we're getting in enough energy. We have to make sure we're getting in enough protein. We have to make sure we have adequate carbohydrate availability. We do not want to be under fueling ourselves as athletes, especially under the guise of, it being that this diet is healthier for us. Because if we are, low energy availability, we're under fueled, we're having symptoms of relative energy deficiency, we have nutrient deficiencies, etc. We're getting low bone mass, we're having all of these issues, then this is not a healthy diet for us, is it? So something to think about. Now, the next thing I want to talk about as we make our way through this episode is some of the specific nutrients that I pay particular attention to with my clients who are plant-based or vegan, because they are nutrients that we tend to get more readily, more abundantly in animal foods versus plant foods. And I'm going to give just some kind of pointers, advice, etc., about how do we navigate this in somebody who doesn't consume a lot or any animal foods. And of course, the first one, if you have been a plant-based eater for any length of time, you're probably familiar with vitamin B12. And vitamin B12 is a really important one, or one that's always warranted to have a conversation about, because vitamin B12 is only found naturally in animal foods. So this is our eggs, meat, dairy products. So animal foods have B12. All of them do naturally. But vitamin B12 is something that can be so easily supplemented, or we can eat foods that are fortified with vitamin B12. So a lot of nutritional yeast products are fortified with vitamin B12. A lot of plant milks are fortified with B12. Tons of other, plant-based food products, or even a lot of supplements that we might take, we could be inadvertently getting quite a bit more B12 than we even realize if we kind of add up all the different places that we can be getting B12 from these fortified or supplemental sources. And I actually talk to a lot of plant-based eaters who don't even like their vitamin B12 level. If we get their vitamin B12 checked in their blood, despite not having any animal foods or very limited animal foods in their diet, their B12 level is fantastic. And we look a little bit further, they're getting so much more than they realize, just because it is added to so many things so readily, and often pretty high doses. Is it possible to get too much B12? Technically, of course, you can get too much of anything. But typically, because it's a water-soluble B vitamin, we're excreting what we don't need. So people would be needing to take huge amounts from supplements in order for their B12 level to be, elevated in the blood. But I do think that if you are a plant-based eater, and honestly, even if you're not, it's a good idea to keep an eye on your B12 level and just get it tested regularly. Once a year is good if your level is normal, more often than that if it isn't. And the reason is because, and I'll talk about this more in a minute with genetics, but you can be at higher risk of deficiency because you don't absorb very much B12 from the foods that you do eat that have B12. It's not just a matter of eating the B12 or not eating the B12. It's also a matter of how much do you actually absorb and use in your body. And that comes down to some genetics involved. The second nutrient is calcium. So, of course, dairy products are the primary place that we can easily get calcium in our diet, but there's also lots of other plant foods, nuts, seeds, that are sources of calcium as well. We get small amounts from some leafy green vegetables. And then, of course, many, many plant milks and other plant kind of dairy alternative products are fortified with calcium, which is a great option. And so if you're regularly having like almond milk, you're making smoothies, you're having like lattes that are made with like oat milk or something, you actually might be getting quite a bit of calcium from consuming these dairy alternatives that are fortified with calcium. Your best bet is to just check labels on your food products and just kind of see what you're consuming and what you're getting in that has calcium throughout the day. We can't test your calcium intake, like how much calcium you're getting via your blood work, because it's an electrolyte. So it's pretty much stable, the same in your blood all the time. So we really need to look at your diet and then kind of assess the adequacy of the calcium that you're getting in. Again, this is something that you can very easily do with a sport dietitian who will be happy to help you assess your calcium consumption and make sure it's adequate. And then we have iron. So we have two types of iron that we get from food. There's heme iron and non-heme iron. The non-heme iron is the type of iron that we find in plant foods. The trouble with it is that we don't absorb it quite as well as we do the heme iron, which is what is found in the animal version of iron, the animal food sources of iron. And so because of this, people can be eating lots of iron. Again, genetics play a role here too in how much iron we actually absorb and use from the food that we get. So people can have an iron deficiency without necessarily being a plant-based or vegan eater. We don't absorb it as well. However, I would not recommend, do not take an iron supplement without getting your levels tested to actually see if you are deficient or not. Iron is something that you can get too much of from supplements. You can hurt yourself with getting too much iron. So it's always a good idea, especially if you are having maybe symptoms that make you suspect that you might be iron deficient, low energy, low exercise tolerance, you're out of breath really easily, pale, etc. Making sure that you're getting that checked before you just go ahead and start supplementing. And then we have omega-3 fats. So omega-3 fats are a really important type of fat because it's beneficial for exercise recovery, reducing inflammation. And of course, there's other like systemic cardiovascular health benefits, cognitive benefits, etc. So omega-3s are really, really key. And we have two different types of omega-3 fats that we get in our diet. There's the plant form of omega-3s, that's our ALA. This we get from things like walnuts, hemp hearts, canola oil. And so these are very beneficial. And of course, as a plant-based eater, getting in nuts and seeds, etc., is a great idea. However, there's also the EPA and DHA, which you may have heard of as well. And these are types of omega-3 fats that come from marine sources. So these are our fish or fish oils, or there's also algae oils that we can supplement that are not fish oil, right? They're a plant-based omega-3 supplement that are high in EPA and DHA. So, I think that for a lot of plant-based eaters, we are only going to consume so much omega-3 sources. And again, this kind of goes for my non-plant-based eaters as well. People may eat quite a bit of fish throughout the week, but a lot of people that I meet are not eating enough fish to really meet their omega-3 requirements. So this is a supplement that may be considered. That's something that you may want to talk to a dietitian about, whether or not you need an omega-3 supplement based on your dietary history. because it's one that I just in my line of work talking to people is an area that people often would benefit from increasing their intake of omega-3. So I think definitely as a plant-based eater, getting in more of those foods. I mentioned walnuts, hemp hearts. Chia seeds are another really good one. Flax is another great one. Flax seeds, you can add those to a lot of different foods. But the EPA and DHA is definitely a gap for a lot of people. And then the last one is choline. And so choline is a nutrient. It's important for a lot of things. And I also find that it's one that people are not as familiar with. So choline is important for muscle recovery after exercise, energy metabolism. It does a similar job to folate and vitamin B12. Now, as a plant-based eater, you're probably getting lots and lots of folate from all those fruits, veggies, nuts, seeds, and grains, which is great. Choline is found primarily in protein foods. It's especially, things like egg yolks, beef, chicken. Our plant protein sources, such like soy, beans, lentils, are sources of choline as well, and some of them can have a pretty good amount, but we need to eat quite a lot of volume of these things, which, as I talked about, can be a little bit of a challenge and may or may not be possible or reasonable for you given kind of other nutrition considerations, right? How many calories are we aiming for per day? How many grams of protein are we trying to get? Are we getting enough carbohydrates, usable carbohydrates in that we don't necessarily want to be needing to eat like 2 cups of beans at a meal to get the protein, get the choline, because it's going to crowd out the fuel, like the other carbohydrate sources that we're really looking for. So, the plant proteins, obviously, that I think they are great. I've talked a lot on this episode about how good I think they are. They are, a source of choline, and that's fantastic. But it may not be feasible for us on an exclusively plant-based diet to get in adequate choline to meet 100% of our needs. So this one can be a little bit of a tough one for my plant-based or vegan eaters. So you may want to consider some supplemental choline just to make sure that you are, in fact, meeting your needs. And as I touched on with B12 and iron, genetics actually influence all of these nutrient pathways. So there are genetics involved: iron, choline, B12, calcium, omega-3s, as well as things like vitamin D, yes, vitamin C, folate, etc. Those are ones, though, that as a plant-based eater, you definitely should be getting enough folate and vitamin C. Genetics play a role in our metabolism and how we use these different nutrients. So you may be at higher risk of a deficiency for these nutrients based on that, in addition to the fact that you may not be getting as much of some of these because you aren't consuming very much or any animal foods. So there are certain things that you as an individual might need to pay more attention to in terms of certain nutrients, really planning your diet around getting in more of certain things, or there may be a need for you to supplement, in certain areas, whereas the next person maybe wouldn't need to think about that. And then finally, the last thing I want to just touch on really quickly with this episode was our plant-based meat alternatives. So there's so many different things on the market nowadays, lots of different companies and brands that are coming out with various products. One of the big ones, just an example, would be like our Beyond Meat type of products. Now, I think that these are fine to have in small doses, to use them kind of sparingly, say in social situations or in certain recipes, certain dishes, when you really want or need the texture or the flavor, etc., of like the meat alternative kind of idea. I think that they're fine, but they are very high in saturated fat. They've been made to be nutritionally very similar to red meat, which I don't think is a positive thing. Nobody asked me for my opinion when they were making these products, but they were created to have a very similar or a matched nutrient profile to like beef, right? Which, if you're looking at a plant-based diet from the perspective of wanting to eat healthier, i.e. less saturated fat, then you are far better off choosing something different, like a burger made with like black beans, some other whole food plant-based type of alternative, or even like in the non-plant space, having chicken or fish or something like that versus having beef. I would consume these, sparingly. And it really comes down to, as a plant-based eater, our diet should be, and this is true for everybody, mostly whole foods, mostly unprocessed foods. So if you want to have some beef in your diet on occasion, between something like a Beyond Meat or your regular red meat, nutritionally speaking, they're very similar in terms of their nutrient content. Now, if for you, from an environmental or an ethical perspective, do not want to have meat and would choose something like Beyond Meat instead, that's totally fine. But if in small amounts, right, to have it sparingly, you want to have red meat from time to time, that's totally okay too. Like nutritionally speaking, they're not going to be giving you anything that is all that different. If you as a runner, are really looking for some help optimizing your plant-based diet, helping you understand like what foods you should focus on, which supplements are going to, help you reach your nutrient targets, all of those things. If you're kind of on the fence with all of this, just sort of thinking about plant-based eating, not really sure where you want to fall on that spectrum, figuring out what makes the most sense for you, what foods should you include maybe from the animal category versus what do you not need, all of these things. If this is something that you're just trying to navigate and you really want to understand it more, then I would absolutely love to help you. You can find out more about how we can work together. I have lots of great options for working with runners on their nutrition. I have one-on-one coaching programs. I have my online course for runners all about fueling. It's called the Fuel for Runners course, as well as the Fuel Train Recover Club, which is my online program, covers nutrition, covers training, everything you need to level up your running performance. So you can find details about all of that in the show notes. Like I said, I would love to help you out with optimizing your diet, helping you figure out what you need, what you don't need. And yeah, that is it for today's episode. I want to thank you so much for listening. I hope that it was helpful for you. If you are currently a plant-based or vegan eater, I hope it helped you understand some of the ins and outs, some of the nuances of how we can make sure that you're getting enough of what you do need, not too much of what you don't, and some of the key nutrients that I want you to be paying particular attention to. If you are on, trending or sort of thinking about wanting to be more plant-based, that I hope that this episode gave you some insight about how we can best do that and, what foods we want to include, maybe what foods we, don't want as much of. And again, what supplements may need to be considered in some situations. So that is it for today. We will catch you right back here next week. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.